So Amanda called me and said, hey, we had somebody cancel. You want to come back? And I said, they want to hear me again? She goes, yeah, we want you to talk about sex. I was like, oh, okay. Makes sense. Now I know. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to have Amanda close the door because I just don't want the random person walking by hearing us talk about sex, right? We're not just going to talk about sex. Let me open us in a word of prayer. This topic creates sometimes a lot of angst, and it's a very personal and vulnerable topic, isn't it, right? It's for all of us in our lives. So I just want to open us in a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we just thank you for the gift of marriage, and we thank you for the gift of sex and the connection that you desire between husband and wife. We thank you that it's a beautiful, wonderful, amazing gift. And Father, we just pray for today that you will give us listening ears and that you will speak through the words that I share, that we will hear your heart and your desire for marriages. Lord, I thank you for all that you do in our lives. In your son's name we pray. Amen. All right, so we're actually going to talk about intimacy, and intimacy is a lot bigger than just physical intimacy. So we are going to look at 3 different options today. I was trying to figure out how do you start a conversation about sex, so I will tell you a funny story. This actually has to do with my children. I don't know about you, but when I was growing up, I got 0 lessons on sexual anything from my parents. They were of the boomer generation, and they just didn't talk about that. I think I told you last time I got 1 book when I was 12 years old, and the book was called Now That You're 12. And Mom said, read it and ask questions. I was not about to ask any questions after I read that book. And I do think she told me about periods, but that was kind of the extent of it. I knew nothing really going into marriage other than what I talked with friends. We did some premarital counseling, but that was with our pastor, which is super awkward as a young 21-year-old to talk with your pastor about sex. And so I didn't have a lot of people to talk about. But my husband and I knew when we had kids, we were going to change how we did things because he had no conversations with his parents, probably less than I did. And so I have 2 children that were born 18 months apart, and I realized that was a very foolish decision, and so I waited for a while to have my 3rd. So they were 4 and 6 when I was pregnant with my 3rd child. And I have a very precocious, very mature 4-year-old daughter at the time who wanted to know one day while I was driving the van down Virginia Parkway, how does the baby get out? Now, immediately my brain went to, okay, I'm going to be better than my mother. I'm going to answer this question. And so I told her that babies come out your bottom. And she was like perfectly fine. Okay, great, thank you. I messed up. I should have given a little more details. About 3 weeks later, she came to me, and it was clear she had been pondering this answer for 3 weeks. She goes, Mom, aren't you super concerned the baby's going to fall into the toilet? And I was like, what are you talking about? Well, she thought I was going to poop the baby out. I had neglected to tell her that there was a special place that babies come out. So we had to have a little more in-depth conversation about babies. You know, this topic, sometimes we freeze up, right, when we need to talk about it, whether it's with our kids or even with our spouse. So I want to talk today about 3 things. When I work with couples, as you may imagine, sexual issues is one of the top things that we deal with sometimes in marriage counseling. It is often the thing that's associated with a lot of conflict in marriage. But what I've actually seen too is this first one we're going to hit is emotional intimacy. I actually am seeing a trend, and we're seeing it in a larger way. I'm seeing it personally when I talk to people my age, but we're seeing it in the literature, in the research, in marriage and family. There's an issue with emotional intimacy, particularly when people get to my age, because they spend a whole season of their lives focusing on their children and not on their marriage. And then they wake up one day and their kids aren't there anymore, and they look at each other and go, you're a stranger to me. And they had stopped developing this friendship, this emotional intimacy with their spouse. On the screen, there is a QR code, and I did check it. It works this time. I'm so excited. I was fixing it after last time. Those are some resources, and I will show you a few. I went and just found some great Christian resources. I cannot possibly, in an hour, cover this whole topic. Several of you sent questions. I'm going to kind of touch on some of those. Thank you very much. That helps me to know which direction to go. So let's talk a little bit about emotional intimacy. But before we do, I want to talk about two key ingredients as we talk about this whole topic of intimacy. And they're two things: humility and respect. We live in a world that has taken this topic of intimacy and distorted it and skewed it and made it something sometimes that's ugly, sometimes something that's perverse and crass. And so I want us to treat it the way God designed it, in a way that is honorable and respectful. Also, one of the things I've had to learn as a wife after 35 years is that I need a huge dose of humility. I didn't quite realize how self-centered I was as a person until I became a wife and a mom. And as I became an adult, I recognized about myself, gosh, I think about myself a lot. And this verse from Philippians 2, I shared with you last time that we had a season in our marriage that we were struggling. And this is the passage that God probably impressed upon my heart the most, because he was trying to get my attention about my own self-centeredness, and that how it was a destructive force in our marriage because all I was caring about was my own opinion and my own perspective. And so he gave me this verse, this passage: don't be selfish, don't try to impress others, be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others. You must have the same attitude that Christ Jesus had. I didn't recognize when I got married that this humility needed to apply to my intimate relationship with my spouse. Because the way God designed sex is so intimate and so personal that if all you're thinking about is yourself, you're going to have issues. Because if all the other person is doing is thinking about themselves, you don't end up connecting and having a really great relationship. The other thing that I have noticed even in our Christian culture is this idea of respect and this word that's in Ephesians, submit. And sometime along the last 30 years, submit became a bad word. And I think that's unfortunate, because if we actually read Ephesians 5, Ephesians 5 actually talks about not just a wife submitting and doing whatever the husband wants, but 5:21 says submit to one another out of a reverence for Christ. That it's mutual submission. It's two people who love the Lord so much that they humble themselves and consider the other person. Now, I recognize as we jump into this topic today, there are probably people in a room this big that are married to people who may or may not be following the Lord or may not be Christian. So I recognize that this topic's going to be hard for you to navigate if your spouse doesn't have the same relationship with the Lord. And so I'm going to try to be sensitive to that and approach how you personally can be reverent and honor the Lord. Because really, that's the only person we can be responsible for, right? Ourselves. And so just know that I'm aware of that in a room this size. Talking about intimacy requires vulnerability. And I also recognize in a room this size, not everybody in this room had a positive experience growing up with intimacy. It's possible that somebody in this room had got to see firsthand the distorted view that the world has of this topic. Maybe personally experienced it way before they were supposed to, exposed to something, abused by someone that should have cared for you. And so I want to recognize that that may be you sitting there too. And so I'm going to be sensitive to that as we go through this to recognize, because I know people sent in questions and shared a few things as they asked questions. So I know in a room this size that'll be the case. So we're going to be respectful and humble, and I'm going to touch on some topics. Here's the thing: you cannot change everything in your marriage all at the same time. Last time I gave you so much to talk about and think about, and this time I'm going to give you a whole lot to think about. choose one thing that you recognize, hey, I probably could do better with this, or I need to think about this, or I need to read more about this. Don't be overwhelmed by the enormity of this topic or last time's topic. All right, let's move on to the three areas. The first area that we're going to talk about with emotional intimacy. I have discovered I don't really enjoy my sexual relationship with my husband if I'm not happy with him and we have not spent much time together. I told you last time, physical touch is not my love language. Well, guess what? When you have sex with somebody, you got to touch them, and they got to touch you. And so that became an obstacle after kind of the honeymoon period of our marriage. Honeymoon period was kind of fine, you know, those first couple of years before we had children. The second we had children, when you have children and you're nursing, and then you have another one 18 months later, you are touched out. So the last thing I wanted was him approaching me. And then the other thing that was happening in our lives, because we had two little bitty kids, is we didn't have any time as a couple. It was survival. And I know some of you are in that season. My adult children are in that season. And so for us, I didn't really understand how important the foundation underneath it all of friendship was. I want to remind you of the fact that at some point in your life, you met the person you're married to, and you couldn't get enough of that person. You couldn't get enough talking to them, spending time with them, going and doing things, planning fun things, laughing, all those things. And somewhere along the course of life, we lose that because marriage is hard and life is hard and bad things happen and kids are stressful and we fill our schedules really full and we have careers and houses to maintain and all those things. When I look at people who are in my season of life, I shared with you, who are struggling in their marriage, it's usually less about sex and more about the emotional intimacy, the fact that they didn't stay connected to each other. So I want to share a few things with you. On your table, I gave you two handouts. They're the same color, but notice there's two. And there are enough around the room, but I think what happened is there's a few tables that don't have as many people as other tables. So just at the end, make sure you have one's on friendship and one's on physical intimacy. So if you do not have enough for your table, then borrow one from the tables that have plenty at them. I want to remind you of a couple of things. First of all, God designed marriage for your marriage to be the number one relationship in your life, even over your children. And so we have to prioritize our marriage. If you want to still be married in 50 years, you have to invest in your marriage. And you have to invest together as husband and wife, as friends. Because here's the thing, your kids will leave someday. I know it seems impossible if you have little kids, but they will leave someday. And then the house gets really, really quiet. I think that was the thing I noticed the first. I noticed that, and I noticed my dinner table. For my husband and I, we had made a priority about sitting at the table together at dinner. And as every child launched to college and left our home, the places that I sat at my table got smaller and smaller and smaller. And one day, I looked up and it's like, oh, there's just two plates at my table. And at first, I really grieved that because I was like, oh, I missed, shockingly, the arguing, the loudness, the complaints about school, the friend issues. I was like staring across at this person. It's like, oh, right. That's what God designed. It's supposed to come back to me and you. Now, luckily, our very challenging season had happened way before we were empty nest. So by the time we got to empty nest, we had already started working on our marriage. So while I was grieving that my kids were gone, I was like, okay, I am so glad that we started working on our marriage because I'm not actually unhappy sitting across from you. I'm sad that it's quiet. But if you don't prioritize your marriage, you may get to those two plates at the table and not like sitting across from that other plate. And I don't want that for you. Because here's the great thing. Empty nest, if you've invested in your marriage, it's amazing. Oh my gosh. We actually had to tell our adult children to please not come home unexpectedly. I'm going to share a few things. I'm going to be real careful because I try to respect and honor my husband. But when I was younger, married, I didn't realize when I had kids how much having children in the house would impede my sexual desire. I was always thinking somebody's going to walk in, somebody's going to holler out in the middle. Like, I just could not concentrate most of the time. That is not the case in Empty Nest. It is glorious. But now my fear is, because all my kids live in DFW, that somebody's going to show up. So we told them, this is no longer your house. So unless you want to see your parents naked, do not come in the front door unless you have texted us that you're on your way. Because now I've learned you don't just have to have sex in the bedroom at night with the lights off. Who knew? Like, it is so great. I actually like having sex because I can have it at like 10:30 or 11 in the morning and I'm done for the day. It's like, I actually have energy. And when I talk to couples and I work with couples and I talk in a group like this, here's why I don't mind talking about sex and sharing you a few things. Because I want you to have what God designed. Because I get to testify that I'm living in the fruit of the really bad seasons that we worked on and we came through. My marriage isn't perfect, but there are so many things we get to enjoy because I, at that middle point of my life when we were having difficulty, woke up one day and God said, you better start paying attention to this really, really important relationship I gave to you because I gave you a good man. And if you don't, you're not going to be happy in the later years of your life. And so I'm very thankful that he allowed me to realize that I needed to stay connected to my husband and prioritize it. So we started changing a few things, just to tell you a few tips. When we were struggling through the difficult seasons, one of the things we started realizing is we are so consumed with children and their activities, we have no time for ourselves. So we started instituting a rule in our house that mom and dad would have a window of time that was couple time. And unless you are bleeding or the house is on fire, do not interrupt. Now, we didn't go anywhere. We would just sit on the couch, or we'd stay at the dinner table, or we just started realizing we need to connect. Like, we need to at least have a conversation that has nothing to do with soccer, baseball, dance recital, band, homework, or a child that's in trouble. And so we would make all those topics off, and we would just check in for, okay, how are you doing? How are we? When can we get away? Can we sell the kids yet? No, we cannot. And we started being super intentional. We also we had some older couples in our lives that were starting to help me, in particular. I had a couple of mentors that were helping me with this humility thing. Because I was really, in the bad seasons, in this place of like looking at my husband's flaws and the things he didn't do. And I was very focused on the fact that he, a lot of times, was not emotionally available to me. At least I perceived that way. It's like, okay, you want sex all the time, but you rarely check in to see how I'm doing. You don't talk to me about my feelings. And if I do start talking, your eyes glaze over, and I know you're starting to try to fix my problems for me. Well, I was super focused on that at the time. And how do you develop a friendship when you feel like your person's not connected to you? But the Lord started working on my heart and said, just start praying about your heart. And so I did. And God called me to start doing something that I didn't want to do at first. God started calling me, I want you to start intentionally serving your spouse. And at first, I didn't know what God was calling me to do. And at first, it had nothing to do with sex. It had everything to do, I want you to start honoring and respecting and serving your spouse and just see what happens. So I don't know about your house. We have things in our house like just things that we naturally fell into that I do versus he does. One of the things he does is the trash. The trash and the trash cans, rolling them onto the street. And I can't tell you how many times in our marriage I have driven into our driveway and seen the two trash cans there and just left them. Because it's in my brain, it's like, that's his job. He'll roll them behind the fence. And it was in this season that God started prompting me every Friday after the trash was picked up, rolling the trash cans for him. Like, that is not going to make a big deal, God. And God just, like, sometimes I don't know if God's a little pushy. He has to be pushy with me because I'm stubborn. And so I started doing that, pushing in the trash cans. And he noticed right away. He's like, wow, thanks for pushing in the trash cans. You're welcome. And I didn't say anything else. And then I started doing other little things. God almost put me with a little challenge of, okay, see how many things you can do to actually serve him, but you cannot do it to get recognition. And my mentor was helping me with this too, because I like recognition when I'm actually doing something, right? I want to be like, hey, pay attention that I did it. But I just started doing little things like giving him, cooking his favorite food, or picking up snacks. I don't send him to the grocery store. Do your husbands like get a list, but then they pick up all these other extra things that you don't need in the house? So I never sent him to the grocery store, and I felt bad. It's like, okay, I need to be nicer. I'm going to pick up. He eats like a 12-year-old sometimes. So I picked up a few things, and he would just be like so happy. The other thing I started doing is God started convicting me of my lack of physical touch, because my husband would complain, it's not just about sex. You don't even touch me. Like, we can go days, and you don't even like touch my arm, touch my back, hold my hand. I was like, okay, God, I'm going to work on this. I don't like sports, but the boys in my family would watch sports 24/7 for the rest of their lives. And so God started convicting me, because what happened in our marriage is in the evenings, even if we didn't have sports we were at, when the kids went to bed, when they were little or bigger or whenever, he would do his thing, and usually it was watching sports, and I would go somewhere else and do my thing, read a book, do my own thing, talk to my mother on the phone, whatever it was. God convicted me, hey, you need to start prioritizing your marriage. You need to be in the same place as him. Okay. I started sitting next to him on the couch while he would watch sports. I do not like watching sports. So I decided, okay, I'm going to start with sitting here, but I'm going to bring my book that I was reading. Well, he was overjoyed. And I also did this thing. If this is him, I sat on the couch and I did this, much to my chagrin, as close as I could get, like my legs touching his legs. He was so happy. The first night I did it, and I really did. I stayed through. But I thought, well, I'll just sit here and see if it counts if I'm reading my book too. And it did. He didn't even care that every now and then I would throw out and I would ask a question, and that like really scored points. And at the end of the night when we were going to bed, he goes, oh my gosh. He said, I just love that you sat the whole night with me in the den while I was watching the football game. I said, and here's the thing, it was so easy. I said, well, you didn't mind that I was reading my book? He goes, oh no, I know you don't like sports. He goes, and thanks for sitting so close. Because the other habit I had is I like to sit in my special little cozy chair, and he sits over here like Lucy and Ricky on I Love Lucy, where they would sleep in separate beds. Because I don't like physical touch, so I like my space at the end of the day. So I started making changes in my marriage, and he noticed. And here's what it did. It started doing little clues to my husband that I was trying to connect with him that had nothing to do with sex. And he started reciprocating, and I didn't do anything. Now, I was praying for him, because I was like, okay, God, y'all get a lot of the real me. I had to work on my selfishness even in my praying, because I'd be like, okay, God, I'm doing a lot of work. When am I going to start like seeing the fruit of what you're going to do in his life? But it did start happening, because we had a couple that we knew that were about 15 years younger than us. And one day, he had a little minor surgical procedure. And 24 hours later, he was in ICU. And 3 days later, he died. And they were like 42. Unbeknownst to him and unbeknownst to the man who did the procedure, he had leukemia undiagnosed. And something happened with the procedure. Anyway. And as we walked with that couple through this wife through grief, she had 4 teenagers, my husband started listening to her, like he just was so profoundly shook by that thing of losing your spouse at 42 and watching her walk through grief. And I was ministering to her, but sometimes I'd come home and share about it, and he was actually starting to listen, because remember, I was sitting next to him on the couch, and so sometimes he was actually like listening to me. And I happened to casually mention one day that the thing that she missed the most was the fact that every single morning of her life, her husband brought her coffee in bed. And how touched she was because her teenage son had started doing that for her after her husband died. That he had said, Mom, I know this was, so she had been modeling. They had been modeling and they didn't even know it. About a week later, I'm sitting in my bed in the morning. That's where I do my quiet time, is in my bed. And my husband comes around the bedroom door with a cup of coffee. And I was like, I knew it was one of those moments you don't react other than appreciation. And he just said, hey, I just wanted to bring you your cup of coffee. And I said, thank you. I really appreciate it. He's been doing that ever since. Now, he's not home every morning, but the mornings he's home, he makes me my coffee and brings it to my... prioritizing and me beginning, God convicting me to serve my spouse, started reaching him in a way that my words had never reached. Because he was a man that just needed to see some things. Now, he still doesn't go super deep. His emotions are very in boxes, but he's getting better at connecting. We had to start communicating about our friendship and talking. We learned that if you do not talk to each other, you miss things about each other. I think I thought when we got married that we had talked so much. We dated for 2 years. We never stopped talking. And then we got married, and it's like, we don't talk as much anymore, even in the early days. And I think we figured, we learned everything there was to know about each other. But here's the thing, you change. You change. And we had somebody once tell us that and it was somebody who'd been married a really long time. It was this panel that they did at church one time, and it was everybody on the panel had been married at least 50 years. And somebody asked what was their secret. And one couple, I will never forget it, the husband said, stay curious. He goes, if I could tell you one thing, stay curious about your spouse. Never stop learning about them. Never stop asking them good questions. Never stop finding out their favorites, what they're struggling with, what their fears are, what's going on in their life, what's going on for them that they don't talk about. And it struck both of us. It's like, and we went home and he goes, is there any new stuff you haven't told me in a long time? And I said, yeah, how long do you have? Because we hadn't talked about deep things. He was flabbergasted to hear that things like my favorite food and my favorite color had changed in 25 years. Yeah, they changed. Oh, hey, I'm struggling with this, or I'm struggling with that, or hey, I'm hitting menopause and this is really hard, and whatever it was. And so I would encourage you, if you're not communicating, you're not asking good questions, you're not connecting, one of the tips of improving your sexual relationship is you've got to connect outside the bedroom. I had downplayed that importance. And it shouldn't just be that, we got to sit across from each other and interrogate each other. You should be having fun. And sometimes life is not fun. Raising 3 teenagers was not fun. But now we can laugh about it. I had my husband sit down last night and read the little tips and stuff, and he was making jokes, and I said, I'm so glad we can laugh now. He has been a jokester my whole life. He has a really funny sense of humor, but I do think that laughter and having fun is what sustains us. Like, sometimes you just got to laugh about how bad it is, because if you don't, you're just going to fall apart. Sometimes we laugh. There was something we were doing last night, and he randomly said 10-4. And I said, you mean like the CB? I was like, where did that come out of your brain? He goes, I don't know. I haven't a clue. It just popped out. And I was like, okay, yeah, we have fun together. If you have lost the fun and the friendship, that may be the place to start, even before fixing the sex. If life has gotten too busy, if you have neglected your marriage, if you're not just enjoying each other when you're not talking about sex or wanting sex, then you might want to start there. Because I promise you, it will improve other things if you enjoy your friendship. Now, I realize if you have kids, that's hard to do. On your little handout, I wrote down what I think I told you last time about prioritizing spending time together. Here's my rule of onces. Once a day, carve out 30 minutes. So that was when we started scheduling the 30 minutes where we told the kids don't interrupt us. Once a day to catch up. And we tried to catch up. We catched up on practical things like tell me about work, what was stressful today, what was the highlight of your day. It was awkward at first because we hadn't talked in so long. But we started making it. Once a week, because practically you cannot afford dates or nor do you have time. Once a week, at home, do some sort of date. So one night a week, put your phones down, put the kids in bed, make everybody go to their rooms if they don't go to bed early, and just create a date at home. And then once a month, go on a real date. Like plan a real date out somewhere. Start investing like you did when you were dating and you met each other. Invest in the friendship part so you can reconnect. Once a year, get away for a whole weekend. I cannot tell you enough how important it is to get out of town, away, even if you drive to Richardson and stay in a hotel for 2 nights. Get away. Get away together, just the two of you. And then every 5 years, go away for a whole week. I know that's logistically really hard with children, but if you plan for 5 years, you should be able to figure out how do I plan a week that, even if you have to divide up the children to different people, aunts and grandparents, and right in the middle of our really, really challenging season, we hit our 20th anniversary. And I wasn't really sure that I wanted to live with my rule of get away for a week. But we had been working on it, and we had been working through things. We were talking better. Our friendship was getting better. Even the sex was improving. And so he booked that trip that year for our 20th anniversary to St. Lucia, all-inclusive Sandals Resort, and we got away. It is probably the best vacation we ever had. Maybe because we were in the middle of working on things. Maybe it was because God had already started working on my heart about sex, which we're going to talk about next. We had sex every day of the week on that vacation. I was like, this is almost as good as our honeymoon. We were just a lot younger then. But I don't say that to brag. I say that I recognized, we haven't had this much uninterrupted time in our marriage in almost 20 years. And so it was so good just to get away and be in a beautiful place and do whatever we wanted to do, not have to. Now, that was the year the Rangers went to the World Series or something, one of the other years they went to the World Series. And so we had to go find a place to watch that. But I sat with him while he watched sports. I did. Here's the other things that he started doing for me, and then I'm gonna break and let y'all talk. He recognized, as we start talking about sex, that I am not the same as him. And if I've been with kids all day, the last thing I want to do is have sex once they go to bed. And so he started saying, hey, because he realized if I relaxed, I was a little more open to a yes. And so I started this routine of going and taking a bath every night. And while I was in the bath, he was usually finishing putting the last stubborn child to bed. Usually I would help with the first couple, and there's always one that just does not like bedtime. So we started doing that. It was like amazing. It's like, oh my gosh, okay, yeah, maybe I can consider saying yes tonight. It was not a given every night that he let me. The other thing, I hated giving baths to children. Does that make me a bad mom? I didn't like the bath time. So he took bath time, and I will gladly wash the dishes in the kitchen by myself if you will give all 3 of these monsters baths. Back in the day when you had to help them. So we just learned you have to tune in, respond to each other. All right, so we have question 1, and I'll let y'all have a few minutes to talk at your tables. How do I intentionally invest in my friendship with my husband? How could I improve? So talk about that, and then we'll move on to sex. All right. Hopefully you had a few minutes to talk about your friendship. Here's the reason I start with emotional intimacy and friendship. It's an easier conversation to have than what we're about to talk about, right? It's easier to start saying, hey, you know what? I miss being friends. Can we start doing stuff together as friends again? And if maybe you're the one that's like, I've been there. Start praying about your attitude. We're going to talk about that when we end with spiritual intimacy. Because it really is, most husbands are not going to say, well, no, I don't want to be your friend. Most of them married you because you are their friend. If your husbands are wired like some men, they don't have a lot of friends. And so their companionship, they did marry you for companionship. That's why when most men are widowed or divorced, they get together with someone else fairly quickly because men don't like being alone, and they do or are looking for companionship. Okay, we're going to shift because I want to spend some time covering a topic that has a lot of myths and misperceptions and unrealistic expectations out there in the world. I cannot possibly cover this topic, but I want to hit some highlights. And I'm going to show you a bunch of good resources that are out there right now if you like to read. There's also on that resource, if you don't like to read, there's some podcasts and some websites, so you can have shorter things to read. First and foremost, I want to remind you, sex was designed by God. If you're like me, because I grew up in the church, and I grew up in a time in the church where the church talked almost none about sexual relationships and marriage. They would do their cursory little sermon series on marriage, but they didn't really cover that. And maybe it's because I was a teenager or young adult, and there were too many young adults. I was in a college town, and they didn't want to cover that with young adults. I don't know. But I think there was some misunderstanding that we were supposed to go from sex, don't do it, to marriage, sex, anything goes. I don't know about you, but I had a hard time switching from that to this. I didn't know how to undo all the wrong messages I'd heard about sex because it had been portrayed as a bad thing because of the whole abstinence, purity culture. It was portrayed as a bad thing. So when I got married and now it was a part of what God had designed, I didn't know how to switch my brain. I also, because I didn't have a lot of people talking to me about what did marriage look like, what did this intimate relationship look like in marriage, nobody talks about that. When I was growing up, I didn't know what to expect either. Was I wrong? Was he wrong? What was wrong with us? So I had to do a lot of really studying God's word to recognize that, wait, God designed marriage, and he designed it for our pleasure, for our enjoyment, to connect us to this one person other than himself that we're supposed to be the most connected to. And he gave us this gift of physical intimacy as like this primary way to connect us. And not only just to connect us, but he wired our brain and all the hormones in our brain to be released to bond us closer together on top of it all. So he wired it all to work. Now, we live in a world that broke it, right? And we have a lot of distorted views. I think one of the worst places that's done the most damage to marriage and sex is Hollywood. Marital sex is not like movies, TV, Hallmark, or books. It's not. It doesn't work that way. It's not that simple. Everybody doesn't respond all at the same time. It just doesn't work that way. That's not how we were created. And so if you have adopted a lot of views about your relationship, sexual relationship, based on things you've read and seen, you can't live up to it, nor can your spouse. All the men on Hallmark are fictional. They do not act like that in real life. So you have to ditch that. Here's the other thing that I didn't know going in. All of us are wired differently in even how we respond in this area of life, in this area of our relationship. And rarely do two people get married that have the exact same desire and response. Now, used to, everybody would say, oh, men want sex all the time, women never want sex. That is actually not true either. There are lots of women in the world who want sex more than their spouse, or vice versa. Like, it goes either way. So there is no, like, what's normal? Well, normal is you've got to figure out your relationship with your spouse, right? There are a few myths. There is no normal frequency. Anybody who tells you you must do it this many times a week to have a healthy marriage, every marriage is different. Now, there is, in the Bible, it's very clear you should have a sexual relationship with your spouse. That's biblical. It talks about not depriving each other except for in cases of prayer and fasting. So you have to communicate and talk about how do we prioritize our sexual relationship. There's a lot of stuff you read. If you read things growing up like I did, like all the teen magazines and all the Cosmo and all the stuff, I had some really skewed ideas of how this was actually supposed to work. And I just thought everything would happen at the same exact time and everybody would be like, oh, and fireworks. And I was like, hey, this is all it is? I was greatly disappointed on my honeymoon because I was like, well, that was fast, and I didn't feel as much as I thought I would feel. I don't know where you are in your actual sexual relationship, but there's men and women don't respond the same. I've heard people talk about like men are microwaves and women are crock pots, but what I do know about myself is I can be fully intending to have sex with my husband, and he does one stupid thing after he gets home from work, and my brain goes, yep, nope. Because I'm wired, the way I'm wired, I know about myself, is I need to feel these feelings of attraction and connection, and I need to know he's for me, and he's safe and trustworthy. And unfortunately, I sometimes misperceive things he does, and it shuts it all down. That's how I'm wired. I have to have this. And so we now joke. I told you we joke now about things that were hard then. He jokes now. He goes, oh, yeah, I got to do all your little rules because I had a lot of rules. Now we can laugh about them, but in the bad season, it was not a laughing matter. I am a girl that everybody must be clean if we are going to have sex. Is anybody else like that? Like fully clean, gotta have a shower. You cannot come in from mowing the yard and think you're getting anything. But for him, it does not matter. Through 35 years of marriage, it does not matter if I just had a baby, if I've just run a race, if I am wearing my sweatpants or my prom dress, it doesn't matter for him. He's like, it doesn't matter, I just love you. Okay, but it matters to me. So I did have things like, but here's the thing. I had to work on, I think I told you, if you were here last time, do you remember me telling you about the night that I went out with a different group of women? I had gone out with this group of women that were not making me a better wife. We would go and talk bad about our husbands, and then I went out with somebody different, 2 women that were different. That night was me complaining about things in our sexual relationship. A, something I should have never been doing in the first place. That's a no-no, to like be talking bad and sharing. But B, they started, that was the night they said, this is about you. And it goes back to that humility and respect thing of like, you have taken something that's supposed to be beautiful and you've made it so negative. Like he's such a bad person because he wants to connect with you sexually. And that's where they challenged me to have sex for the next 7 days in a row. Here's what they said to me. They said, you have got to shift in your heart and mind about what you think about this topic and what you think about your spouse. And so they challenged me not just to have sex with my husband for 7 days in a row, but to start praying for myself. And I said, you want me to talk to the God of the universe about sex? Yes, why aren't you already? That's what they said to me. I was a really traditional, strict Baptist girl. The thought of talking to God about an orgasm was really hard to do. Or the fact that my husband, he's not very sensitive to what I need. But guess what? God already knew all that. And so I said, okay, I'm going to try to pray about our sex life. They said, well, don't just pray for him. I said, I can't pray for him? Yeah, you can pray for him, but pray for yourself more. I said, okay. And so I did. I started talking to the God of the universe of like, God, I know this is supposed to be better, and I'm supposed to have a better attitude about this, but right now I don't really like it. And I know I'm supposed to, but I don't know why. And the other thing they said to me is, it's the type of thing that if you don't keep practicing it, it actually doesn't get better. It is something that you're supposed to do frequently enough that you actually get better at it and you get more connected. I told you, I've gone back and told them, they systematically, hands down, are the two people who saved our marriage. Because had I continued on the path I was going, we would not be where we are today. Because our sex life was about me. That's not the case in everybody's marriage that's sitting in this room. But for me, my testimony is what was happening in our intimate relationship had everything to do with me. Because I had decided, I don't really need it. I don't really like it. I know he needs it, but he's not a very good husband. And he's not emotionally connected to me, so why would I be nice to him? And that was wrong. And that's what God convicted me of, is I was sinful in that. And that's what they held me accountable to. And they checked in and they held accountable. And it turns out, if you do it more and you do number 2, it gets better. I did not like to talk about sex. It was awkward and uncomfortable because nobody talked to me about sex. And it was super hard to talk about parts of my body that I was like, I have to say that word out loud and talk to him about it. But you're doing it wrong. Can you do it differently? Gentle hands. But you know what? He was so grateful. He goes, you mean I've been doing it wrong all these years? I said, well, not wrong. You just do it exactly the same because I guess it worked one time that way. Please tell me I'm not the only one that's been in a relationship where once the husband thinks they've figured it out, right? Like, we're not robots. We don't like it the exact same way every single time. And I had to learn that I could talk about things, that I could say, hey, I don't think I like it that way tonight, or could you do this differently, or hey, could you do this? Because here's the other problem. I had no repertoire of what I could tell him to do. No creativity, so I think that's why sex for me had gotten in this place that I didn't like it, because I kind of just laid there. Because I hadn't realized that God had actually designed it as something good and beautiful and that I was intended to enjoy it. So for me, I was struggling because it was okay, but I wasn't enjoying it because, one, I hadn't allowed my emotional maturity to begin to talk about it, or to even just look at, okay, maybe I need to read some books. So that's what I did. There's a really good book out right now, Christian author. If you are where I was, grew up in this place where nobody taught you about sex, I don't care how far into marriage you are, you still feel like, I don't know what's okay in marriage. I don't know what is going to be wrong to do. I don't know what to do different. I don't know how to talk about it. It's on the list. It's called A Celebration of Sex. Now, I will tell you, if you purchase this book, it has pictures. But it is outstanding. I picked up this book, the first edition, years ago, because I was like, okay, I need to understand what God's word says, that I'm okay to, what's okay? Because I was just very uncomfortable with the whole sexual topic. So it's a really great manual that talks about things about women, about men, about how you talk about things. It's more how to and just some creative. Because the bottom one, we are supposed to have fun and be creative. So if you are where I was, I promise you, if you will get some help or read a good book or talk to a mentor or something, be careful who you talk to, you can have really a lot of fun by the time all your kids are out of the house. It's really much more fun now. Now he laughs. He's like, where was this woman 15 years ago? I said, well, she was raising children. But he goes, do you realize you come and ask me for it now? I said, yeah, I don't know what that's about. Except I was telling them that I'm now on hormone pellets because I had a hysterectomy. And hormones, getting hormones back is wow, maybe I just had low testosterone all these years and now I have the right amount. I don't know. There are also two good books. There's a guy's version and a girl's version. The Good Girl's Guide to Great Sex and the Good Guy's Guide to Great Sex. They're written accordingly to help kind of see also Christian, all these books are Christian books, the perspective of, what do we not understand about the other gender, about the other sex and how they are wired. But here's the thing, I told you at the beginning, there are men that are less interested in their wives. There are women who are less interested in their husbands. There were a lot of things going on for me at the time. Children, physical touch is not my love language. We were having marital issues outside of the bedroom. Medically, my thyroid was off, so there were some things going. So here's the thing. Sex is not always about there's something wrong in your marriage. There actually might be something medically or hormonally wrong. For your husband, too. Sometimes I've worked with couples. I was telling at our table that I worked with a young couple. They were under 30, and I was like, why is he never interested in sex? And that's pretty unusual for a man under 30. And so I just recommended he go get a physical. And it turns out he had a pituitary tumor. He had a pituitary tumor that was inhibiting a lot of the hormone production in his brain. Once they removed that, everything changed. He also was struggling with depression that was being caused by the pituitary tumor. So just know there's lots of things like stress, medical conditions, medications that impact, hormone issues, raising children. There's a lot of things, and you need to talk openly. You got to be able to talk about them. You also have to remove pornography. We have such access to pornography. I say very few black and white things, but I will tell you pornography will destroy your marriage. Pornography is never a good idea to spice up your sex life. I think it opens the door to the enemy, so just don't even let it in. And if you or your spouse are struggling with pornography, then get help for that, because it can take over and it creates very unrealistic expectations of what marital sex looks like. It has become an epidemic, and most of this younger generation got exposed to it starting at the age of 8. That's the average age right now, exposure to pornography at age 8. So recognize it's a real issue in our culture.
I think women's pornography
It's on the rise.
It looks different, though, too.
Yes.
Think about Bridgerton. It's like softcore porn.
Yes.
It's
Yes. Or when that whole 50 Shades of Grey came out. So there's some stuff that's really distorting sex, and the rise in women struggling with pornography has increased. Yes. I want to pause for a second and let y'all talk for a minute. Here's what I would tell you. If you are struggling in this area, you may be struggling in this area because of what happened to you before you got married. And if you are, a one-hour session like this will not solve all that. I would strongly encourage you, if you have things that have happened in your childhood or your teenage years or young adult years that you've never really processed, dealt with, worked with, I would really encourage you to seek out a professional counselor. Because you need to work with those issues with somebody who can really help you dig in to whatever the trauma is or the lack of trust, or because it's going to impact your marriage, and it's certainly going to impact your intimacy. And listening today and picking up a good book and looking at my tips on the handout are good, but you may need a little more support and help. And so I would remind you that that's a really great place to start if you have that. All right, let's go to the questions for this area, and y'all talk for a few minutes, and then I'm going to cover the last thing. What are my unrealistic expectations about sex, and what's the biggest struggle in this area of my life? All right, y'all talk for a minute, and then I'll come back and finish this up. All right. I want to end on one last point. Hopefully you can continue having conversations. Here's what I would tell you about conversations with other people. It is good to understand that we all are struggling in some of the same areas. I would caution you to be very, very respectful, to not share too much personal about your spouse with other women. Maybe pick a mentor or one person, but be very careful, because this is such a personal, vulnerable spot. It's hard to then go home and communicate if your spouse knows you've been talking to someone about your sex life. Here's the other thing I would tell you. If you are not having sex very frequently, if it's something that's challenging for you to approach, start by just calendaring it. And I know that sounds really, really strange. I tell couples that in counseling all the time. We're going to start with the schedule. Because here's the thing I know about sex. You do have to do it more to begin to get better at communicating and experiencing it and enjoying it. So especially if you have little kids, put it on the calendar, because whichever spouse has the lower desire, sometimes that helps that person to know, oh, Tuesday night is the night. So I'm going to work on Tuesday on myself, preparing myself, because Tuesday night is what we agreed we're going to meet and have sex that night. It helps the person with the lower desire. The person with higher desire is super happy because they know Tuesday is coming. The other thing I would tell you is, whoever is the higher desire in the relationship, communicate and find out what is the expectation and what is the kind of rhythm of regularity that will not completely, like, some high expectation wants sex every single day. That's not realistic if the other person is low on desire. But come up with an agreement. I learned about every 72 hours, and I kept him in this place of so happy that he started emotionally connecting with me. But that was my husband. Everybody's different. Figure out what it is. I want to end on the last slide. Here's why what my friends challenged to me to do actually changed my life. They didn't give me a lot of sex tips. They told me to start praying and start having sex. Those are the two things they said. They didn't tell me what to do, all the things. It is an important aspect of marriage, and if it's not working, or if it's struggling, or if there's something harmful happening, you need to pray about it and take it to the God of the universe, because he resolves a lot of things. And you need to pray about yourself primarily. God, help me to connect with my spouse. God, help me to desire my spouse. Help me to have the right attitude. Help me to honor you in how I treat my spouse. And dig into God's word and some really good Christian resources to see what God actually says about marriage and sex. And then pray together as a couple. We were horrible at doing this. Horrible. It's the lowest area of our life, praying and talking about God together. And we were both Christians. We did it separate. We did not do it together most of our married life. It changed significantly when we started praying together, out loud, every single day. Let me give you a little motivator. I tell this to my students in marriage and family. It's the one thing I tell them. If you remember nothing else from my class, remember this. It might make a huge difference in your life. The average divorce rate in the United States is about 45%. About 45% of people who get married, their marriage ends in divorce. In empty nesters right now, that percentage is up to 60. There is one statistic that will change your divorce rate. The research shows that couples who consistently, daily pray with each other out loud, together, their divorce rate is 1 in 1,152. You know what that stat is? Less than 1%. It is the only statistic out there that is that low when we're talking about divorce. And it's one thing: praying out loud together. Because praying out loud together is so intimate, because you're talking to the God of the universe together about your life and your marriage and each other. 1 in 1,152. That's huge. I tell that to my students all the time. Here's the other thing I want to read to you, and I will end. Y'all can do the last question. This is another good book on your resource list. It's called God, Sex, and Your Marriage. So if you really want to understand why God designed it and some really key questions, you could pick up this book. It's not very thick. But this is what I want to read, why I now know that this worked. This is what transformed my life. Was not really all the things I changed in my sexual relationship, it's what I did spiritually. The genuine Christian life is a life of passion. Just as with sex, our passion for God is guided and protected by the other pillars: faithfulness, intimate knowing, and sacrificial love. Our faith isn't driven by raw emotion, but unparalleled joy and passion should be the regular expression of knowing Him. This joyful celebration with God, interestingly, impacts our brain in a way that is similar to sexual intimacy. Prayer and meditation increase dopamine and serotonin levels. Even secular scientists encourage people to pray and meditate because of the calming, healing effect it has on the body. Neuroscientist Daniel Amen notes the connection between spiritual intimacy and sexual pleasure. Both peak experiences seem to be processed primarily on the right side of our brain, especially the right temporal lobe and prefrontal cortex. So enhancing one experience may, in fact, help the other. Enhancing right hemisphere function may enhance both religious and sexual experience. It goes on to talk about the reason that worked for me is because God wired my brain to connect and know Him first. And the exact same area of the brain is for me to connect and know my husband too. Is that not the coolest God we serve ever? So if you're frustrated, start praying. Before you do anything, start praying. And tell God, He already knows. And it just so happens the same areas of your brain are going to get impacted. Thank you for having me again. I know we couldn't do deep dive into everything. I'm going to lay out all these resources so you can look at the books. There's a few that are not on the list. And then I've got 2 other handouts. They were actually QR codes last time that didn't work. One is on soft startups, how to communicate, how to talk about a hard conversation and start it up gently. And the other one is the handout on praying for your spouse from head to toe. So thank you very much. There's one last question if you want to take time to talk about it.